Greetings and shalom. This is Adrian Scott, and welcome back, or welcome if it's the first time here, to Truth and Testimony, the broadcast. This is time for some more shekels for your thoughts. I was sitting there the other day, and this idea just kind of popped into my head, and my wife and I have talked about this one a few times, as well as some other people in our little community of like-minded believers, and I just thought it was something that I would share with you all. And I'm going to title this, as you've probably already seen in the title, as Offered to Idols. And this comes, or is talking about the Apostle Paul. Now, this is already a controversial figure, and some may say that perhaps after Yeshua himself, Paul is the next most hotly contested figure that we read about in the scriptures. What was he teaching? What was he saying? We get a reference from Peter that the things that he was teaching were difficult to understand. He studied at the feet of Gamaliel, who to this day is revered as one of the greatest rabbinical, Pharisaical teachers of all time. And one of the prerequisites to being in the position that Paul was in is, now I might understand this incorrectly, so I could be wrong here, but had to have effectively the entirety of the Torah, which is, of course, the first 5 books of the Old Testament, or the Tanakh, basically memorized in order to study at the feet of Gamaliel, which the Apostle Paul, or Shaul in Hebrew, which he did. So there was a lot of stuff going on. This even goes down to the idea that after Judas betrayed the Messiah and was taken out as one of the 12, as one of the 12 chosen, that he was going to be replaced. And Yeshua basically gave instruction to wait for that point, that eventually it was going to be Paul that would show up and would take over. They decided not to wait, and they appointed someone else instead. So he's been a loaded topic, and you can look online and you can see lots of love and hate when it comes to the Apostle Paul. There's one thing amongst many that he said that I am going to touch on today, and this touches on his offered to idols thing in something we read in 1 Corinthians chapter 8. And it is, I'm just going to read the last verse. Really, it's the entirety of the chapter. And I would encourage you, as always, pick up your Bible, read it for yourself. Read a chapter before and after it. Just get into the Word. But I'm just going to read the very last verse of chapter 8, where it says, to sum up, which is all I'm doing right now, summing up. To sum up, if food will be a snare for my brother, I will never eat meat again, lest I cause my brother to sin. So it's kind of missing one of the points of this, so I'll bring it up here. But basically, what we're talking about is meat that has been offered to idols. And really summing it up, Paul is saying that if even if something has been offered to an idol, it makes no never mind to me. It doesn't cause me to stumble in my faith. I know who I worship. I'm not worshiping that God. I'm worshiping that God, the only true God. So whether or not, you think that that's been offered to that, it doesn't affect my choice in who I'm following. However, what he goes on in the rest of chapter 8 there to talk about is there are young believers out there, as well as others, but I'm just kind of using new believers, freshly reborn, as it were. And they would see him and they say, that meat's been offered to idols. And look at Paul. He's one of the most venerated people of ever. Well, if it's okay for him to eat stuff offered to idols, then it's okay for us to eat stuff offered to idols. Now, in their mindset, it is offered to another god. This is the background that these people had just recently come from, right? To follow the followers of the way. And what Paul is saying is, I know which direction I'm going. I know who I'm following. And that has no bearing on me because it's not real. Who they're offering it to is not real. However, if it causes any one of those young believers to stumble in their faith and they think that partaking in things that are offered to idols is okay because they see me do it, then I will never do that again. I will never eat that meat again, right? Lest I cause my brother to sin, as it just read there, or cause him to stumble, I think I've read in a couple of versions. So, and I guess the main point of that, and what I wanted to bring up here, it's not so much like we really should not get in the practice of following pagan things, right? The difficulty is in our world today, so many little customs and traits can actually be traced back to a pagan origin of some kind. It really doesn't mean that to any of us nowadays, right? The difficulty with that mentality, and I think I've mentioned this in videos before, is it doesn't matter what it means to us. What does it mean to the Creator? And if he is the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow, and always, right, then the way he viewed something using our human scale, right, the way he viewed something 2, 3, 4,000 years ago is still the way he views it today, and the way he will always view it into the future. So that's who we should be concerned about. And so we can see these things, different practices that have evolved. And honestly, when you talk to a lot of people, I'm trying to avoid the big examples that I can talk about, but I'll use one. Easter eggs dyed. Now, keep in mind, originally, the intention of that was Easter eggs dyed red, and red was the only color they were dyed. Nowadays, we get all these fancy patterns and everything else, but the fundamental practice is the dyeing of Easter eggs. This goes back to this pagan fertility practice, right? And at least so far as I understand, in the Eastern Orthodox Church, to this day, they still dye Easter eggs and only dye them red. If you talk to almost anybody within that faith that is practicing that stuff or doing that stuff, you get one of two things. They either are not doing egg dyeing or anything for any religious reason whatsoever, because it's become very much a secular, unreligious practice for so much of culture in a lot of parts of the world. Or if they are doing it for religious reasons, they don't know the history of it and what it goes back to. I don't want to get into too much detail because it's a bigger rabbit hole than I want to tackle. But again, it was part of a very disturbing, very violent, very evil pagan ritual, this dyeing of Easter eggs, or this dyeing of eggs. I'll just say dyeing of eggs. So the point on that is nowadays, they have no idea why they're doing it. They either don't care because it's not religious, or they don't know the history of it. Going back to the point, ultimately, it doesn't matter what they do or don't know or why they're doing it. How does God view it, right? How does it seem to him? And to him, it is still as keenly in his face and in his memory and in his nature, like to see it now as it was back then, and when it was originally started as this practice. So I hazard a guess that's how he saw it, and my guess is that's how he still sees it and how he will see it forevermore. So should we then do it? If that's the case, I would say no, right? So we shouldn't get into those practices at all. Now, there are things like I'm trying to think of a little example. I can't really come up with one off the top of my head, but there are things that all of us do on almost a daily basis, little things. And they may have some dark origin like that, but you don't know, right? And that's okay. It's like I'd say once you do know, which is the case for my wife and I, and part of what we're following, is once we realized what the history of those things was and that concept of how God views it, we had to stop. And I mean, giving up a lot of these things, and this even goes down to some of the clean food laws and stuff, like we don't eat pork and we don't eat shellfish and stuff like that. Believe me, that wasn't an easy thing for us to give up. Both of us had lived a goodly portion of our lives very much eating and enjoying that stuff. Bacon and sausage were amongst my most favorite foods, and now I don't eat them. And, sometimes I still like, I would just love to have something like that, but I can't do it because of what I believe. And now it goes back to being a heart thing, right? If I believe that it's wrong to eat that, whatever the reason is, and there's a whole other conversation there, but if I believe that it's wrong and then I do it anyway, it's not about the eating of that food. It's not about the partaking in that particular ritual or event or anything like that. It's not about that stuff. It's about your heart. And what Paul is saying, to bring it back to that point, is it doesn't affect his heart, right? He knows that God ain't real. He knows that those practices aren't going anything. It doesn't deter him at all. It doesn't steer him off of that narrow path for an instant, right? But he's that solid in his foundation. He is that solid in his belief, And it's not a risk to him, right? But he's acknowledging in 1 Corinthians chapter 8 there that not everyone is as sure of that road. Not everyone is as sure of that line of travel as he is. And things can still happen that can lead them astray. And what he's ultimately saying is, I don't want to be the cause of leading anybody astray, right? I want to build up their belief. I don't want to take them away from it. And if doing any of those things is going to take them away from that, then I will not, because not having them sin, not causing these people to stumble is priority number one. Because if they do, there's no relationship with the Creator. That's going to fall apart, right? It is so easy to get drawn into the things of this world. And I know there's a lot of you out there that can agree with that one, because it happens to all of us on a regular basis. All those temptations. There's a reason we're sinners, right? Because it's so easy. And so it's that idea of those things don't affect him. And I would say that he was probably steadfast enough in his ways that he wouldn't make a lapse like that. He may make his own mistakes, because believe me, he was the first to acknowledge that, I'm the least of any of these people to have this honor or to hold any kind of distinction like this, as he points out, because I was persecuting these people. I was actually chasing them down and torturing them and, doing awful things, right? It's like, why do I get this forgiveness? Well, it's not because of you, Paul. It was because of the Creator and the Messiah, and they had different plans for you. And I think that's what we should remember. Is it's not about being perfect. It's about, I love the way this one fellow put it that I follow. It's about really not just saying it, not just the lip service, but doing the best you can with what you have. Now, part of that, doing the best you can with what you have, once again, back to 1 Corinthians chapter 8, is even if you're confident enough in your walk that something is not causing you to stumble, it's not taking your eyes off the goal or anything else, but there's a chance, and you think there's a chance that it could be affecting someone else, then I challenge you, stop doing that. It's not worth it if it's leading someone else to stumble or fall away, right? That's just too important. Anyways, that was pretty much it. Just that idea. Keep that in mind. And again, I encourage you, read 1 Corinthians chapter 8. Read all of 1 Corinthians, but 1 Corinthians chapter 8, and just have that idea in the back of your mind of what is the point that he's trying to make. Is it about not connecting with things that are pagan related, or not causing your brothers or sisters to stumble? Or are they both equally as important? I will leave that for you to dwell on. With that being said, I wish you all blessings in the name of Yeshua, our Messiah. And I say have a great week, and shalom, and bye for now.
You've been watching Truth and Testimony, the broadcast. If you have a comment, please leave it on the bottom of this video or email us at truthandtestimonyemail@gmail.com. Again, thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Truth and Testimony, the broadcast, is not affiliated with Truth and Testimony magazine.